Okay, let's dive in. We're talking about 777. Not a jackpot, but the title of this really interesting book. Super limited edition, right? Only 500 copies.
That's right. Bound in Scarlet Buckram, London, 1909. And the subtitle is something else.
Oh yeah, get this. Vel prolegomena symbolica ad systemum sceptico mysticae va explicandae fundamentum hieroglyphicum sanctissimorum scientiae summe. Wow.
Yeah. If your Latin's rusty, it's basically saying it's a symbolic introduction to explaining a kind of skeptic mystical path.
The hieroglyphic foundation of the most holy highest science.
Okay.
So clearly not your average beach read.
Not at all. And you immediately get this this tension. 777 sounds so definitive, but the subtitle suggests this deep, complex dive into symbols, doubt, mysticism. It's ambitious.
Totally. And that's what this deep dive is all about today. We're focusing squarely on this book, 777. The source material tells us the author was aiming for something huge.
Monumental, really.
Right.
Trying to systematize both mysticism, that like direct experience stuff, and comparative religion, looking for the common threads.
It makes you think, doesn't it? This drive to organize everything, find the underlying patterns. But 777 seems unique because, as the intro points out, it tackles a paradox head-on.
Exactly. How do you deal with all the symbols out there? Billions of them, across all cultures.
Right. A skeptic might say, see, it's all contradictory, none of it's real.
But a mystic could flip that and say, well, maybe the fact that these symbols are everywhere means there's some deeper truth trying to bubble up in different ways.
So how do you square that circle? The author of 777 doesn't just, split the difference. They talk about embracing the contradictions?
Yeah, almost like moving beyond regular logic. It's fascinating.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The text hints at Nietzsche, the Overman idea. Like, maybe being able to hold conflicting ideas is actually a sign of deeper insight.
Right, like breaking free from, limited thinking. The author uses analogies like someone struggling with advanced math or scientists stuck on old ideas. It's about that breakthrough moment.
And it wasn't just thinking about it. The author explicitly wanted to combine these things, find a way for skepticism and mysticism to work together.
Not just coexist, but inform each other.
So that's our mission today, really. We're exploring this incredibly ambitious, sometimes, let's say, opinionated attempt in 777 to map out connections across tons of different spiritual traditions. For you listening, wanting the quick version, we're digging into the core stuff from this dense but fascinating work.
And to really get why the author did it this way, you got to look at the history they lay out. They weren't just starting from scratch. The intro actually critiques earlier attempts at this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. They kind of run through a who's who of esoteric history. You've got von Rosenroth, Christian Rosenkreuz's vault symbolism.
Guy and Kelly, Cornelius Agrippa, Raymond Lully, even the Theosophists in groups like the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucian societies in England.
But it's not just name-dropping, is it? They have some pretty sharp criticisms.
Oh, definitely. They basically say earlier efforts were, incomplete, too dogmatic, way too bulky, or just lacked proper sorting. No real system.
They really don't pull punches. There's even a bit of a jab at some leaders of those groups for maybe not being the most intellectually focused. It sounds like the author thought the whole field needed a shakeup.
And even big names get critiqued. Helena Blavatsky, they admit she had this immense genius for acquiring facts, especially about different religions. Yeah. But they follow right up, saying she had none whatever for sorting and selecting the essentials.
Oof. Brilliant researcher, terrible filer, basically.
Pretty much. But they do give props to Fraser's Golden Bough. They liked its core idea that seemingly different religious figures or concepts might actually be tapping into the same underlying thing.
They use that example, right? Someone in Japan thinking of Hachiman, someone in South Africa thinking of the Lord of Hosts.
It's fundamentally not two thoughts, but one. Deep down, it's the same impulse.
Which gets us to the author's main driver, the whole point of 777.
Exactly. They thought the real reason groups clashed wasn't because their core beliefs were so different, but because their speech, the way they expressed things, was different.
So the grand plan was to create this kind of universal symbolic language to fix that.
Yeah, to bridge those communication gaps. But it wasn't all high-minded philosophy. The author had some pretty strong takes on contemporary religion, too.
Oh, boy. Yeah, they really lay into some new movements, especially American ones, accuse them of being, grossly and crapulously ignorant.
Ouch. And clinging to the putrid bones of old ideas, basically.
And they didn't hold back on Mary Baker Eddy and Christian Science either, did they?
No. There's this frustration with how words like God were being in their view, twisted to fit ideas they saw as illogical, even paranoiac.
It really shows you the author wasn't just some detached scholar. They had skin in the game, strong opinions, makes 777 feel alive, I guess.
Definitely. And that frustration extended to philosophy, too. They complain about how terms like God, the absolute spirit, were used so inconsistently.
Meaning different things to different people, creating confusion.
Right. So there was this perceived need for clarity, for defining terms. Even if it meant simplifying things a bit, they wanted a usable system.
Okay, so that explains the motivation, which brings us to the sources. Where did they pull all this information from for the tables in 777?
This is where you really see the scale of it. The list is immense.
It's not just the folks they criticized earlier, right?
No, it's way broader. Traditional systems, Pietro di Urbano, Lilly the Astrologer, Eliphas Levi, Sir Richard Burton.
Swami Vivekananda, Hindu, Buddhist, Chinese classics.
The Quran, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And they mention their own research, too.
It's staggering. And they claim this was a first, didn't they? Bringing all these specific systems together?
They did. They argued that the Chinese, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Egyptian systems hadn't really been systematically lined up with the Kabbalah like this before.
And the tarot attributions, too. They said those hadn't been published so comprehensively.
It's a bold claim. They suggest maybe someone like Eliphas Levi knew some connections, but was like sworn to secrecy or something.
Which touches on that whole secrecy thing in esoteric groups. The author seems pretty skeptical about it.
Very skeptical, especially about groups like the Rosicrucians and the Golden Dawn. They basically argue, look, a real secret is something you literally can't put into words, not something you just promise not to tell.
Right. They mock the idea of making people swear oaths and then revealing something basic like the Hebrew alphabet, as if it's some huge confidence.
Calls it wicked imposture sometimes, especially when people claimed secret Rosicrucian documents that were apparently just sitting in the British Museum for anyone to read.
Huh. And they specifically name-drop Dr. Wynne Westcott in that context, suggesting his claims were hardly credible. They weren't afraid to call people out.
Not at all. And the annoyance with needless secrecy comes through in that analogy they used.
The differential calculus one.
Yeah. Trying to teach advanced math to someone who can't even do basic arithmetic. Their point is, withholding the fundamentals, the alphabet of mysticism, is just being a selfish charlatan.
Teach what you can teach so people have a shot at grasping the rest through experience. Makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the why, the critique, the sources. How did they actually organize all this stuff in 777? What's the structure?
The key, they state explicitly, is the tree of life. That complex diagram from Kabbalah showing divine emanations, the cosmos. That's the skeleton.
The foundation everything else is built on.
Precisely. They stress that the arrangement, the proportions, it all matters. It's like a cosmic filing system.
So the tables aren't random lists. They follow this tree structure mapping relationship.
And the main idea is juxtaposition and proportion. Put different symbols, gods, ideas side by side on the tree.
And suddenly you see connections, analogies you wouldn't otherwise.
That's the goal. It's like a structured comparative database.
But given the scale, did they admit it couldn't possibly include everything?
Oh, absolutely. They're quite upfront. Since you could theoretically place all things whatsoever, including no thing, on the tree, the tables are inherently incomplete. It's open-ended.
Yeah, capturing all of mysticism and religion. An
Right.
infinite task. So how did they manage the sheer amount of data in the book itself?
Well, to make it manageable, they explain that the smaller tables are kind of derived from one huge 32-fold master table.
Okay, so like the entries under Saturn in a smaller table are actually part of the 32nd section of the big one.
Exactly. It's a way to present this complex network without it being completely overwhelming.
Yep.
Like zooming in on a map.
Gotcha. Were there important things they consciously left out of this first volume?
Yes, they mention that specifically. Several big systems of magic aren't included.
Like what?
The 4 lesser books of the Lamegtin, that's a famous grimoire about spirits and the whole Ipermelon system, they acknowledged its qliphothic ramifications.
The darker, more chaotic stuff within those systems.
Right. Might be harder to slot neatly into their main tree structure, perhaps.
So even within Western stuff, there were gaps they planned to fill later. Did they mention future work?
They did. There's this intriguing reference to a bigger book called the Book of the Concourse of the Forces.
Ooh.
They link it closely to the Tarot and the Book of Thoth, suggesting it would be a deeper exploration and application of 777's principles.
So 777 was really just the groundwork, the prolegomena, like the subtitle says, intended as step 1.
Seems that way. And they hoped others would build on it too.
Really? How so?
They explicitly invite scholars to offer constructive criticism, send in tabulated info on religions or philosophies they missed, even superstitions.
Wow.
They use this dramatic analogy of the wounded Satan being helped by his legions, basically calling for a collaborative effort to make the next version way more complete.
That's surprisingly open, almost like early open source thinking for esoteric knowledge, especially
Yeah.
given how critical they could be.
It really shows the ambition, I think, to create something truly useful. They even tackle the fact that, at first glance, a lot of the table entries just look like senseless words.
Yeah, just lists of weird names or terms.
But they believe that with practice, with deeper magical or mystical insight, those words would start to make sense. Their connections would become clear.
They compare it to a flower opening up, right? Revealing itself gradually.
Exactly. To the dazzling eye of illumination. It suggests understanding comes through personal development, not just intellectual study.
So the book ends on this hopeful note.
Pretty much. The author hopes that even though it looks symbolic, maybe barren at first, 777 will be the perfect tool for the serious student.
Guiding them towards, what was the list? The quintessence, the stone of the wise.
Summum bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness, the ultimate goals.
Wow. Okay. So wrapping up, 777 wasn't just charts. It was this massive, deeply personal, definitely opinionated attempt to map, well, everything spiritual.
Absolutely. To sum it up for you listening, it's this unique, incredibly ambitious project trying to synthesize a huge range of mystical and religious ideas using this system of correspondences.
And it gives you these fascinating, sometimes controversial glimpses into how the author saw esoteric history and human belief itself.
And the sheer detail in those tables, even if we haven't listed examples today, it just hints at this vast web of potential connections for anyone really curious to explore.
Which leads to a bigger thought, maybe. This human need to find patterns, connect the dots across different ways of thinking. Does 777, even with its quirks, offer any lessons for that quest?
That's a great question for you to ponder. And also, what about that core idea that all these contradictory symbols from everywhere might actually point to some unified truth beyond our normal logic?
Heavy stuff to think about.
Definitely. And maybe the best takeaway is an invitation. Go look at the sources mentioned: the Kabbalah, Tarot, Eastern philosophies, comparative religion.
Dive into those primary texts yourself.
Exactly. Trace those threads 777 tries to map out and maybe, discover some of those hidden connections firsthand.